Houthi drone strikes destabilize global oil markets and endanger security of Yemen and the region. Local rights group says that thousands of violations against children were committed in Yemen. Yemeni government calls on the international community to take firm measures against the Houthis. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English News with me, Shaza Abdelbay. The recent Houthi attack on a key oil port in Hadramaut reminded the world of the previous Houthi strikes on Aramco oil facility in Saudi Arabia. This report has more details.
On September 14, 2019, Yemen's Iran-backed Houthis staged a drone strike on Aramco oil facilities in eastern Saudi Arabia, slashing Saudi oil output in half, or roughly 5% of world market supply. The incident caused temporary disruptions in global financial markets. With the recent failure to restore the Yemen truce, the Houthi danger to Saudi oil has resurfaced. The truce expired on October 2nd, having been extended twice previously. Already, the violence has resurfaced. Yemeni media labeled a Canadian oil company operation in Yemen as a massive explosion, albeit the origin of the explosion and whether it was caused by the Houthis is unknown. Furthermore, the Yemeni government reported last week that its forces intercepted armed drones fired on the Al Dabba oil complex in Al Shihr, Hadramaut, as an oil tanker prepared to dock. According to the Iran-backed Houthis, the warning strike was carried out to prevent the vessel in Al Dabba from smuggling crude oil out of the port. This flurry of military activity begs the question of how much control Iran is exercising over Yemen's Houthis, given that Yemen has long been a proxy battleground between the Saudis and Iran. Since the civil war's outbreak in 2014, Yemen's crisis has functioned as a live-fire testbed for Iran's longer-range weaponry. While Iran may not have total authority over the Houthis, and not every operation on the ground in Yemen is dictated by Tehran, the Houthis owe Iran a great deal for their weaponry and training. Iran will use the Houthis to demonstrate its potential to disrupt the Gulf when it has geopolitically advantages. The inability to prolong the truce in Yemen indicates that Iran wanted to prepare for unrest at a time when it is not only fighting nationwide demonstrations and turmoil, but also attempting to realign regional alliances. At the moment, all Yemeni factions are on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop.
The British ambassador to Yemen denounced the Houthi attack on Al Dabba port in Hadramaut and called it a dangerous escalation.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. المملكة المتحدة تعامل بشكل وثيق مع المبعوث الخاص للأمم المتحدة هانس جرونبرغ، فنحن ندعم جهوده لتجديد الهدنة في اليمن وإحراز تقدم نحو تسوية سياسية مستدامة وشاملة بقيادة يمنية على أساس مراجعة المتفق عليها. نرفض هجمات الحوثيين بطائرات مسيرة على ميناء الدبة النفطي الأسبوع الماضي. لقد كان تسييدا خطيرا للأعمال الإدارية بالإضافة إلى انتهاكه للقانون الدولي وتهديد الأمن البحري. يحتاج الحوثيين إلى الوقف الفوري للهجمات والانخراط بشكل بناء في عملية السلام التي تقودها الأمم المتحدة.
The International Committee of the Red Cross confirmed that the majority of the population in Yemen suffers from food insecurity. According to the organization, this is a result of the humanitarian suffering that the country is going through due to the conflict that has lasted for 8 years. The organization added that many more suffer from lack of access to basic healthcare services.
During my visit, I was able to see firsthand how local doctors alongside ICRC personnel are treating weapon wounded in a local emergency room. I was able to speak with farmers whose livelihood has been severely disrupted by years of conflict and whom we're trying to bring some additional income to regain their livelihoods. Today, about 2 out of 3 Yemenis are considered food insecure. That's about 19 million people. Even more of them lack access to basic health care. Despite all this, Yemen is too often out of the spotlight, and we need to ensure that we receive continued support from donors and partners to continue our work. The ICRC is both addressing emergency needs and is trying to find solutions that will bring respite in the longer term. However, full recovery will only be possible if a political solution to the conflict can be found.
Yemeni Network for Human Rights and Freedom announced that more than 21,000 violations against children have been committed by the warring parties in Yemen this year. This report has more details.
The Yemeni Network for Rights and Freedom announced that it had documented about 21,000 cases of violations of childhood in Yemen by the Houthi militia during 4 years. The network said in a report that it had documented during the period from the 1st of June 2018 to the 1st of July 2022 about 21,000 incidents of violations against children in Yemen by the Houthi group, in addition to the displacement of 43,600 children. The violations committed by the Houthi group against children in Yemen varied between crimes of killing, injury, kidnapping, displacement, deprivation of education, sniping and recruitment, and preventing access to treatment, food and water as a result of the siege imposed by the Houthi group on most Yemeni governorates. The report pointed out the documentation of 522 cases of arrest and kidnapping of children, most of whom were kidnapped in order to blackmail their families. As for the compulsory recruitment of children, the report indicated that the Houthi militia recruited around 12,500 children as young as 14 years old, noting the continuation of the process of forced recruitment and its imposition on the tribes under force. The network documented the killing of about 1,700 children in the confrontations, while they were fighting in the ranks of the Houthi group. The network also confirmed through its monitoring team and private sources that 3,100 children were injured, which was quoted from the records of hospitalization departments in various governorates including Sana'a, Al-Mahawid, Damar, Al-Hudaydah, Hajja, Taiz, Al-Bayda, and Al-Dala. The network called on the international community and international organizations to bear legal and moral responsibility towards the grave violations that children in Yemen are subjected to, in order to put pressure on the Houthi militia and to use all means, including UN and the Security Council resolutions, to prevent it from continuing these crimes and violations and to force it to respect local laws and international conventions.
In Taiz, 2 citizens were injured by Houthi militia snipers on northeast of the city. Eyewitnesses confirmed that the Houthi sniper targeted a citizen who works as a driver. It was reported that the injured person was taken to a Thawra hospital to receive treatment. 2 civilians were injured by a Houthi landmine planted in Al Jawf. Local sources reported that a Houthi landmine exploded in front of the house in Al Matoun district. According to the sources, the explosion injured other citizens in the same area. A Houthi leader and its supporters pointed fire on citizens' homes in a village south of Sana'a. The local sources confirmed that the Houthi attack did not harm anyone, but damaged the houses, shattered windows, and caused a state of panic among women and children. The Yemeni government has called on the international community to take firm measures against the Houthi terrorist acts. This came after the recent Houthi escalation on Al Dabba port in Hadramaut. This report has more details.
The Houthi militia's attack on Al Dabba oil terminal sparked outrage in Yemen and international and Arab condemnation. The government said that its forces had intercepted armed drones launched on the southern oil port in Hadramaut as an oil tanker was preparing to dock. The Houthis claimed responsibility for the attack, and they claimed that they sought to prevent the government from exporting oil. The government responded by warning that all options are open to react to the attack, in what was understood as a sign that it could resume military operations that were halted by the nationwide ceasefire on April 2. The government revealed that this was not the first Houthi attack against oil facilities in October. The militia had carried out attacks against the Radum oil port in Shabwa on October 18 and 19. The government described the attacks as blatant threats to regional and international energy supplies, and they said that the Houthis are clearly insistent on targeting civilians and trade installations in violation of the international law. They warned that the Houthis are crossing all the red lines, citing their threats to neighboring countries and all oil companies in the region, and rejection of all peace initiatives in pursuit of the agendas of the Iranian regime. Moreover, it warned that the Houthis are insisting on paving the way for a new, more criminal and severe phase in the war that will have an even greater impact on the humanitarian situation in Yemen. The government said that the Houthis are delivering a message that they will never be partners in peace, but rather a terrorist group that threatens peace and stability in Yemen, the region, and the world.
Coming next in the news. As winter sets in, suffering of displaced people in Marib continues to aggravate.
كل ما نزحنا من نزحة وانهم فوقنا هدموا بيوتنا. نزحت أنا وأنا بنتي بنت 7 أشهر اللي على زوجي. بعدها تمنا من نزح في نزوح. وقبل الفريق معرض منه. صيحنا لزوجي وصار وداه من هناك. صار مخيم. وقبل الفريق اللي هنا وأنا وجيعي في الخيمة. وعانني البنات ودني العلاج. ساعدني لما دخلني الشركة. طلع علاج فيتامينات. جاتنا الأمطار. دخلت السيول وأنا والده. دخل السيل ما دهنت بالسيل له وتحتي وأنا والده. ما قد إلا يومين.
ولا عاد حتى قدرت أشل عيالي ما بلاتي يا بنت الصغيرة اللي ترضع شليتها وإحنا والله نحن حالتنا حالة وما عاد إلا شلونا من رفعونا لمكان عالي. ووصل اليوم جسنا لنا 3 أيام والله نحن في العرب وجاونا الفريق حقهم حق الاستجابة. والله ما قصروا قدموا لنا من كل شيء.
Welcome back. The Yemeni Journalist Syndicate revealed that 21 violations have been recorded against media workers and the freedom of press in the country in the 3rd quarter of this year. This report has more details.
According to a report published by the Yemeni Journalist Syndicate, an affiliate of the International Federation of Journalists, or the IFJ, 21 media violations were documented in the 3rd quarter of 2022. The International Federation of Journalists supports the Yemeni government and other armed parties in seeking the release of all imprisoned journalists and the cessation of the crackdown on media and journalists. The report focuses on events that occurred between July 1st and September 30th, 2022. During this time, the Yemeni chapter of the International Federation of Journalists has documented 21 cases of violations against media or journalists, including trials and interrogations, incarceration, and refusal to implement rulings. According to the report, the perpetrators of these violations are mostly the Houthi group with 52%, the principal government's opponent. Other attackers include the Yemeni government with 19% and the Southern Transitional Council with 19%. According to the YJS, 10 journalists are still arrested by the Houthi group in Sana'a, including 4 who have been condemned to death. The International Federation of Journalists has launched a campaign to exonerate them. Since April 2015, 4 others have disappeared. Ahmed Meher, a journalist, is still being detained by the Transitional Council soldiers in Aden. Al-Qaeda has been holding journalist Muhammad Qaid since 2015. The Houthi group, the Yemeni government, and the SDC forces were each responsible for one of these detentions. According to YJS, the jailed journalists suffer in deplorable and inhumane circumstances and are denied the right to visitation, medical treatment, and care. The union also criticizes the legal system for exploiting its power to prosecute journalists. In its report, the YJS demands for the release of all kidnapped journalists, the cessation of attacks on unions, the investigation of all crimes against media workers, and the cessation of involving journalists in political discourse. The IFJ expressed their sadness over this report from the YJS about the unacceptable environment in which journalists and media professionals work in Yemen. The organization has renewed their call for the release of all detained colleagues, including those on the death row.
The Youth Alliance of Political Parties held a protest in front of the local authority building in Taz. This came to denounce the government's neglect to the issue of electricity providing in Taz. The protesters carried the slogan, Government electricity is a popular demand, and they asked for the return of electricity to the city and the speedy operation of Osaifara station. As the winter sets in, the suffering of displaced people in Ma'rib is aggravated amid total absence of government and international help. This report has more details.
The years of war dragged on, and with it, the suffering of the displaced in the governorate of Ma'rib continues. Displaced people fled from the blaze of war to camps lacking the most basic necessities of life, especially those 22 camps located in the desert east of the city, where the displaced live in chapters of recurring suffering in the middle of the desert and their fragile tents.
We are going to die from this cold weather. We can't sit without being covered with blankets. You can imagine the condition in which poor people who cannot afford getting blankets live in. People here are suffering a lot. My relatives were living there in the other tent, but I brought them here to protect them from the cold, as the rain swept away their tent.
The poor quality of the shelter and the harsh cold of winter are not the only things that burden the displaced in the camps. The camps of the 3rd sector east of the city of Ma'rib lack the most basic necessities of life, foremost of which are healthcare and clean water, in light of the weak support provided by humanitarian organizations and the absence of the necessary food and supplies. And in addition to the weak support provided by humanitarian organizations and the absence of the necessary shelter and the difficult living situation.
We are residents of Al Sumaya camp. The tent's condition is extremely bad, and it gets even worse in the winter as the rain and the wind ruin our tents. The tents does not protect us from the cold. It feels like we live in the open. The displaced people here in the area are really suffering a lot during this hard time.
The continuous suffering is what the displaced people live in the governorate of Ma'rib. They suffer from many and great pains. Each season of the year brings new tragedies and misery. Displaced people suffer from obtaining clean water, living in fragile tents made from poor materials that doesn't protect them and their children from the cold during winter or from the extreme heat during summer. Many other troubles that they face has been compounded by the significant decline in the volume of humanitarian interventions by international and local organizations, which made the displaced, their elders, women and children, face the brutality and cruelty of life. The continued deterioration of the situation of the displaced and the absence of humanitarian efforts put millions of families in real danger, as their stay in these tents without any means of heating exposes the lives of thousands of children and women to death, especially with the arrival of the severe cold season.
This community has over 270 families, and it was extraordinarily touching to see the work that the humanitarian community is trying to do here. I want to express my deepest thanks to all humanitarian aid workers that are doing everything possible to make the lives of IDP communities in this camp and elsewhere better.
The Yemeni government called for the inclusion of food security, economic, social, and health recovery for Yemen in the agenda of the 31st Arab Summit. Minister of Industry and Trade stressed the importance of supporting agricultural investment at the global level, climate change, and drought affecting the production and its reflection on the economic situation in Yemen. People in Lahj complained of the dangers of water as a result of the digging process. The process is witnessing a large-scale investment in the onion crop nowadays in the governorate. The farmers demanded the pressure on investors to control the digging operation that threaten the water and can cause damage to their agricultural crops. Here's a reminder of the main headlines. Houthi drone strikes destabilize global oil markets and endanger security of Yemen and the region. Local rights group says that thousands of violations against children were committed in Yemen. Yemeni government calls on international community to take firm measures against the Houthis. This is the end of the news. Thank you for watching.